Thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor to be here with you all. We're going to start off first with acknowledging and naming the land we are on. We are currently on unceded Lisjan Ohlone territory, Huichin Village, aka Oakland. The Lisjan Ohlone are the current and past stewards of this beautiful land. So I'm gonna put in the chat the Sogorte, the Shumi land tax, which is a voluntary land tax for guests that are residing on this land. Also, I'm gonna be putting in the website to support. Currently, the Ohlone Lisjan are asking for solidarity and support to protect their sacred site, the West Berkeley Shell Mound. So I'm going to share the link to the website. Please support in all the ways that you're able to. And lastly, if you are not residing on Ohlone Lisjan land, please take this as a call to action to figure out whose stolen Indigenous land you are on, and see and contribute to the Indigenous sovereignty efforts and rightful returning of that land to their original stewards. So thank you all. I'm going to be giving the links now, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. Hi, everyone. I'm Joey Lev. I'm a medical student here at UCSF. I'm calling in from Ohlone and Ramaytush land. And I'm just going to briefly introduce the series and our wonderful hosts for this journey tonight. So this is the UCSF Intrinsic Value Art Series, presenting Relearning the Familiar and Flavored Legacies, Diasporic Foodways as Legacies of Care in one event. Deanna Brownfield and Nicole Godreau Soria reclaim lost stories and cultural practices through multidisciplinary art practices, from painting, natural dyeing, diasporic foodways, and more. So Nicole Godreau Soria is a multimedia artist living and working in Oakland, California. She graduated from the University of Central Florida with a bachelor's of social work in 2009 and is studying printmaking at Laney College in Oakland, California. Being raised between Ohio, Ecuador, and Florida, she's interested in redefining notions of home, identity, and feminine embodiment. Using contemporary printmaking, painting, and social practice, she aims to reshape the collective narrative of women living in diaspora. Her practice is heavily influenced by her ancestry, earth kinship, and the anti-colonial resistance of the Caribbean. Deanna Brownfield is an artist and educator that currently resides in Oakland, California. She weaves personal collective narratives and mythology to unearth stories that have been washed out of the framework of America. She utilizes natural dyes, collage, and painting to inquire about healing and reconnecting with Afro-Indigenous traditional ways of being. She uses storytelling to wield the power of connecting with spirit, to transcend time and space, to honor Black futures as sacred. Revealing the mystical sensibilities when bridging creativity with the earth, ancestors, and the body to exemplify revolution. She holds a BA degree from Millis College and is a Root Division Fellow from the Black Artist Fellowship. She has shown work at Far House Gallery, Root Division, Millis College Art Museum, and Richmond Art Center. And I will add very briefly, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the Q&A. I'll be moderating for each artist after they present, but don't feel you need to hold your question for the end. So go ahead and put it in the chat when you're ready. Without further ado, I welcome Deanna.
Hello, thank you everyone for attending. I would like to thank UCSF for this wonderful opportunity. I will also like to thank God as well as my ancestors for allowing me to be here and just be able to experience this wonderful journey being an artist. I also like to thank my family, my friends, and my boyfriend for supporting me on this journey. So when I first got the prompt of unlikely connections, I thought about my ancestry. So my mother's side of the family is from Chickasha, Oklahoma, and I thought it was important to tell their narratives of, you know, Afro natives, freedmen. So they were enslaved by the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribe, And so I thought it would be important to create a visual representation of, Afro-Native people, but also acknowledging Afro-diasporic history as well. We can go to the next slide. And so I thought it would be a wonderful experience to do a work of art with traditional ways of making. So there's a deep history of natural dyeing in Nigeria, as well as there's a lot of indigenous practices that use materials that are found in the environment. And so using food from African tradition, as well as Choctaw and Chickasaw traditions, I thought it would be wonderful to use those elements to do some natural dyeing. And those foods and herbs and materials are very important for African people, as well as our time, as well as my ancestors' journey during the Middle Passage, as well as the Trail of Tears. And so I first thought about indigo. Indigo has a deep legacy. And so I thought it would be wonderful to incorporate that in my practice. And so a lot of people don't know this history, but indigo was once a form of currency, and a lot of countries like the US and Britain relied on indigo since it gave the most beautifulest hue of blue. And so prior to colonization, Nigerians had a deep history of working with indigo. And so I thought it was important to learn that practice. And I'm still very new to the practice, but I started intuitively working with it and experimenting and seeing what can happen. And so I started using a traditional technique that's used where you use cassava, which is the second thing I want to start working with, to be able to do these different lines and like symbolism on the fabric. And the fabric itself is cotton. So all these different things have relationship with each other prior to colonization, but also connecting back to enslavement of African people in the South, as well as in the Midwest. And also, even with like food, something is very important to a lot of Black people in the South, as well as in the Midwest, is Black walnuts. And so I remember, cracking them and eating them with my grandparents, as well as, friends. And so I thought it would be really interesting to also use that as something I can dye with as well. And then working with ceramics, I was inspired to use red clay and, wanting to use clay that's directly from the soil where my ancestors were from, to use that as a form of dyeing as well. And so with that, I thought about the ways that that memory can be invoked with different materials. So the prior materials that I mentioned have a deep connection. And for me, my first series of dresses are of indigo. And so later on in my process, I'm going to continue to experiment with different things like pecan, okra, and corn, which are very important to African as well as the Native communities as well. And so with that, it connects back to this idea of like these materials coming from the land itself, as well as like water being something very important to African people. And so with that, I recognize that there is a history and memories that reside in the land and our burial grounds, and even a history of like African people being exploited in the process for colonialism when working with indigo and cotton and other materials such as tobacco, and also at the expense of Native people as well. And so something I constantly meditate on is like, water also being something that, is very central in a lot of our cultures. But there is a history of my ancestors being transported during the Ma'afa, which is a great disaster in the Middle Passage, and coming to this land and, being exploited. So there has to be this recognition that, there is these complexities that lie with the land and water. And so recognizing that, I also think there is beautiful things that water and earth hold, you know, such as our creation stories. There's a lot of mythologies, especially in Nigerian mythologies, where the creation stories reside in the land as well in the water. And so those things bear our cultures. And so I know I should have flipped it, but I started off with white dresses. And so I thought about the ways that colonialism has also impacted the way that we dress. And, you know, obviously, like, just being of like African descent, patterns are very important. And that's something that I recognize because I love, you know, the dress, the colors, and all of that. And so during the time of, you know, my ancestors being brought here, we were told to wear certain things. And so I thought about the Victorian gown and how that's something that once, you know, certain things were stripped away from us, we were told to dress in this manner. And so I thought about the idea of dyeing as a form of rejecting these notions of colonialism, as well as these ideas of white femininity that has been imposed on Black women's bodies, and even white supremacy being imposed on, you know, African people globally. So I thought it would be beautiful to, you know, use these dyes like indigo, and using the Nigerian traditional practices where I'm using things like twine to create these type of circular patterns on the dresses, and, you know, allow it to be something where I'm celebrating myself, I'm celebrating where I come from, and honoring my ancestors in the process. And so I first started the series with like my loved ones and did a photo shoot with them, captivating the intimate moments of just like, you know, wanting to recognize that joy and resilience of my family and where we come from, and even like celebrating new life and how that's very important for African people, is just like continuing to share our stories and empowering our babies, and, you know, just sharing those moments that we enjoy together. And so I thought it was important to captivate each personality of the person in the picture. And so I wanted to do that and also just break away from this idea of like typical installation where something's just hanging on a white wall, but just allowing like, you know, people that I love to interact with my work, wear my work, and, you know, being something reminiscent of like what my ancestors used to wear. So yeah, and this is like more pictures of like the moment, and just like, you know, wanting to share Black joy and just like have that be there, but you know, material itself still holds meaning. And so I think, you know, I thought it would be perfect to use photographs as a way of like, you know, telling these stories in different types of ways and capacities. And so this little girl is very special to me. And so I wanted to captivate her in the most beautiful light. She's of Haitian descent, and I thought it was important to photograph her in the most prideful positions, because I'm constantly inspired by the Haitian Revolution and how the revolution started with other Africans overturning their oppressors and liberating themselves. And so I thought it was very important to have these photos be of like young people and babies, because they are like seeds of the revolution. And I thought it was like very important to include that, and even allow her personality, because she has a very strong personality, very independent, and loves to, you know, just loves to just do what she does. So it was very beautiful to captivate these photos. And then for these flags, I know it's difficult seeing the one in the back, but for these flags, I was really inspired by voodoo flags in Haiti. And so I thought it'd be really beautiful to do these snakes to represent duality, and also just to acknowledge that in the diaspora, we also carry a lot of similar motifs and traditions. And so I thought it would be beautiful to represent that. And I wish I had a better picture of the other flag in the back where it has a lot of languages from the Chickasaw tribe, and I'm trying to learn the language the best way that I can. And so I'm trying to weave like the importance of preserving languages as I go on and like, you know, grow in my studies as well as like learning more about where I come from. Go to the next one. So here are some more photos. I thought it was very important to also play with them, to allow the environment to be captivated in the photos and just be able to, you know, the beautiful blues and the greens and the sky and the trees and all those things. My work is very into site-specific installation. So this is my parents' home in Stockton. And so I really wanted to have the clothes be on a hang line to represent, you know, a form of intimacy and like, you know, the viewer being able to be a part of that intimate moment of like, you know, my family being able to interact with these different types of clothing and things like that. So I'm constantly meditating on the idea of reconnecting with the earth and water as a form of healing. And so there is a lot of complexities that exist with our relationships as like a person of the African diaspora and even just people from the African diaspora as a whole. And that's because of colonialism and, you know, forced removal and white supremacy. And so I constantly think about how crafting traditions like natural dyeing, quilting, and weaving could be something that is also spiritual. And so I think it's very important to even acknowledge that these cultural practices and even my identity itself can transcend time and space, even though I'm no longer physically there in like my homelands, but I'm reminded of them every time I interact with my work. And art as a form of healing and also gaining more understanding of where I come from. And so I also, you know, want to address the interconnections of African and Indigenous people, and also just to talk about the issues of, you know, anti-Blackness and colonial practices such as blood quantum that does not, you know, recognize African people who were enslaved by the 5 slaveholding tribes. And so that's something that's very important for me because there's current struggles going on in Oklahoma where they're not being recognized, and then there's still anti-Blackness that exists. And so for that, I really want to extend resources of learning more about freedmen and as well as Black natives. And I think that's very important to do that work of honoring that indigeneity looks very different from what we typically are shown, and also recognizing that there's a lot of things that there still needs to be changed, whether it's in our society and even as like, you know, people who want to be allies of African and Black people. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and just to be able to learn our histories and our stories is very important. And so here are some resources if you are interested in me sharing the slide about more resources that talk about Black natives and freedmen. Please let me know. Here are some beautiful people that I follow on Instagram that, you know, have been very helpful with my understanding of freedmen as well as Black natives. And, you know, just wanted to continue that conversation. I wish I had more time to go on a lecture, but I'm not going to do that tonight. But there's a lot of work that's been done by wonderful people that, you know, continue to share that history. So I want to say thank you for everyone for being here, and also just wanting to learn more about my art practice. And if you want to stay in touch, I have a website and an Instagram. And also I am taking donations to be able to extend this work, because I really want to be able to get to my homelands, whether it's Mississippi, Oklahoma, and be able to get back to the homeland, Africa. So if you want to do that, that will be great as well. So thank you. Do we have time for questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I will again encourage people to put thoughts and questions into the Q&A. We have one now just about distributing your resources. So we'll make sure that there's a way that those go public to those following. It sounds like following you on various social media platforms, on your website, and following what you're up to is also a great way to stay informed. So highly recommend that to those that are listening.
Oh, thank you.
So as we wait for people to put their thoughts together, I'll just ask, you mentioned that your work is very site specific and that every piece, how it's hung on a line, how it's staged, where you are contributes to the story and the meaning of it. So I'm wondering, as somebody who hasn't done an endeavor like that, where do you start with so many kind of pieces to put together? How, where's the inception of that project for you?
For me, I just thought of it as starting where I'm at. So I'm born and raised in Stockton. And so my family comes from the South. So, that's a part of the stories of the Great Migration. So I thought of this idea, it would be beautiful to be able to go to the places where, my family are from. And so I thought it would be great to start with my mom's family, since I know a lot of genealogy that starts from those areas, as well as going back to Nigeria. So that's where it started.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lena Coletto from the audience asks, you mentioned working with clay. Are you working on anything now?
Yes, of course. Hey, Mills in the house. Yes, I am. So I'm working on a project around bodies as vessels, Black bodies as vessels. And so just reclaiming the body and also processing my own experiences through the process of working with clay. And so that's something I've always been into, just creating these beautiful bodies. And some of it is very abstract, but I'm working on it right now. I'm working with it.
Wonderful. It seems like this concept, you're mentioning bodies now, and also with your work that you shared with us, it seems like giving life to your work is really important to you, that it's not just kind of isolated, and that's related to this idea of keeping memory and tradition alive. So I was wondering if you could speak to why it's important to you to have that sort of life element in it.
I think it's very important because in my experience, being an artist and studying at an institution, I thought that art was supposed to be represented in a certain way, and it had to be hanging on white walls. And I realized that's something I don't want to continue in my practice. I want to decenter whiteness, and I want it to be something where everyday people can see my work, and my family could be in my work. And so I really go against this idea of tradition in the Western sense. And so I think it's very powerful to be moving in a decolonizing practice where I'm able to work with things that my ancestors did, whether it be clay, whether it be natural dyeing. I think that's something I feel very empowered in, rather than working solely just in painting. So I'm very into more things that are aligning of my ancestors and what they did.
I love that decentering of the Western narrative as normative or traditional, because it's not as if your work is not traditional. It's just not the traditions of that starkness. So I really appreciate that framing. I want to share from, and I so apologize for all the names that I butcher from the audience, but from Risa. She says, a beautiful presentation, Diana. I'm curious to know, how do you see your work evolving? Are you working on other textile projects now?
Yes. I'm really excited to just to be able to experiment more. And so that's something I really am in the process of. I'm going to be dyeing dresses with clay soon, and using cassava as a resist. So I'm, stepping out of my comfort zone. I don't know a whole bunch about natural dyeing. So a lot of it just goes off of intuition and just, seeing what works or not. So there's more dresses coming soon, and more people I'm including in my stories.
Fantastic. We're all, I'm sure, very excited to see that evolve. And from Rashad, he says, lovely presentation. Thank you for representing for your ancestors. Curious if you will develop your textiles and or clothing, breathtaking images of the women and Chile, or if not, where do you see your work presenting in the future?
Right now, I'm still trying to figure that out. For me, I've just been wanting to just create the work and see what opportunities happen for me to show them. And also, like, I also want to honor, I'm not going to wait for anybody else to give me the chance to. So it's like, whether it be, you know, showing up at a park and showing my work there, that's like something I want to do. And I just like recently thought about, like, you know, I haven't had a solo show yet. So I really want to figure out how to get creative and make that happen for myself. So that's like also in progress.
Great. And then from Amira, she says, hi, congrats, and beautiful artist talk. I was curious to your relationship in culinary arts, as much of this project stems from ingredients. Has there been any relevance of diet nurturing the body within this research?
I feel like I haven't, like, you know, really thought about it in that kind of way, but yes, like, something that I'm really into is like okra at the moment. And so I thought it'd be really cool to incorporate that in my work, because like I enjoy it so much. Like, I eat it raw, and typically a lot of people from the South fry it. So I eat it raw in a salad. And so, you know, whenever I'm talking to people, they sometimes are grossed out about it, but I think it's great. And so I'm always thinking about, like, you know, my dad and his family, you know, eating it. And I wasn't really into it as a child, but then learning and doing more research is a very important thing in African diet, and it's really good for you. And so that's like something I do want to keep in mind and figure out how to like bridge those things in together, because I'm also trying to figure out the ways that I can decolonize my diet a little bit more and eat more traditional foods, plantains, fufu, and all these different things. So I'm still trying to figure out how I can incorporate that in my work.
Absolutely. And from Alexandra, for Deanna, do you have any interest in Malian mudcloth, because it is an amazing traditional practice?
Yes, that's like one of the things that I really want to get into, and learn how to, you know, create mudcloth. And that's like something I'm trying to figure out, like, where can I know this? Where can I be able to learn this knowledge? And so that's why my goal is to be able to get to Africa and be able to explore these different countries in West Africa specifically, to be able to learn these traditional textile practices.
Fantastic. So as the audience continues to think of these incredible questions, I'll continue to satisfy my curiosity. But I'd love to hear more on how meditation and spirituality factor into your artistic process.
Yes. For me, I'm still learning about, you know, ancestral spiritual practices. I was raised Christian, and so a lot of my practices stems from you know, Yoruba traditions, as well as even Christianity as well. So thinking about, like, you know, the connection with the Black church, and even in itself, we have a lot of our African rituals in the church. And so I constantly think about that, and I'm still trying to learn more about my spiritual system. So I'm still very new, but I know that prayer is something that is very important for me. And, you know, even meditations and even, like, you know, calling on the ancestors are very important for me as well.
Catherine Lewis shares, your family is extremely proud of you and your accomplishments. Understanding your background in youth involvement, how would you use your work to inspire youth education?
Thank you for that question. By the way, that's my mom. But for me, the biggest goal for me is to be able to teach young people about these traditional practices, and like create space for them to do so. And I think, you know, for me, being a Black artists, there's typically not a lot of spaces for young people to engage in art and be a valid form of like a career. And so something that I want to do is I want to be able to like, you know, work with other young Black artists and like teach them all these different ways of, you know, making art, whether it be painting, natural dyeing, even a little dabble in aerosol art. And so like all these things are valid forms of creating. And so I want to be able to extend that one day, maybe open a school to focus on like, you know, teaching Black youth about like art in our culture.
Absolutely. And, you know, of course, here in this presentation, we have the benefit of your insights and your process and your, you know, and the histories that you bring up and intercalate into your work. But if someone encounters you in a park, you know, or if we want to go out and spread the gospel of Deanna's work, I guess I'm curious where you start with people that are not as familiar with these creation myths and histories that are so fundamental to the work that you're doing.
I think, I don't know how to answer that question. For me, it's more of like, you know, just starting off with like your family and where they come from and just like knowing the area, the culture. And I think that's like really helped ground me, and also just to be able to, you know, read. I read a lot of books. So books for me, and that's like something I should have mentioned, is like something that helps me think out of the box. So I'm really big right now with this artist, Edwidge Danicat. She's a Haitian writer. And so her work and, you know, Toni Morrison and like just a lot of different Black authors inspire me. So I just think about like what they're talking about typically is talking about spirituality and just like the impacts of colonialism still to this day on like African people. And I just go from there and just like, you know, I guess do my research comes from reading a lot, you know, and just even in history. So I have a lot of passions, so that's where things come from. And so they all interconnect somehow. So I think just starting off with like your passions and just doing the work of like learning where you come from and just even learning more things in a non-traditional sense. So like going hiking, you know, I did some farming for a while. So, you know, those things really helped me, you know, be an artist. And I still, you know, I'm still gravitated to the land. And so with my work, I still find myself, you know, being curious, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Art and curiosity often seem to go hand in hand. So I absolutely appreciate that. We have another question from Bear. She says, on the topic of decolonizing your artistic process, I'm wondering if you can elaborate. Who do you make your art for? Who is the viewer you hold in mind as you create? How do you understand the relationship between creating art and capitalism, consumption of art as a commodity?
I think for me, my art is for Black people. And that's something I'm very prideful about, is like, I want to create art for Black people. And like, you know, and even if you are a non-Black person, you could still enjoy the art. But for me, that's like my audience. Like, I'm doing this art for my people and where I come from. And I want to be able to share the beauty and the resilience that we have. And so I think that's important for me to like, for me to just be able to do that. I feel like that's my job and I'm good at it. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think we will wrap up this portion of the Q&A for now and just say thank you, Deanna, for so beautifully presenting your artwork and for answering all of our questions. We're so grateful. And for everybody in the audience, we will bring Deanna back at the end after we discuss Nicole's work as well, so that we can ask both of them our joint questions. So without further ado, I will yield the floor to Nicole. Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. It's such a privilege, such an honor to be here with you all. I'm gonna share I guess I should introduce myself first. I'm Nicole Godreau Soria. I am a student of life. I plant lover, food lover, an auntie, tia, listener. So yeah, I'm so excited to be here with you all. I'm sharing today about my series Flavored Legacies, and I'm really so honored to share this space with Diana. And when we got paired up, it was just like, I'm so excited to, talk about how both of our work, talks about diaspora and our ancestry, and that's really beautiful. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna share my presentation here. Okay, yay. So Flavored Legacies. It's about Diasporic Foodways as Legacies of Care. I really, when I think about diaspora and what that means to me, my mother is Ecuadorian and my father is Puerto Rican. And so Diasporic Foodways is really like the culinary bridge, especially, and I'll share about my piece Across Oceans later. But Diasporic Foodways for me personally has been a form of medicine as a method to like heal and access ancestral memory. And I wanted to explore in the series this foodways and our relationships with these recipes as people living in diaspora, like how to time travel using the alchemy of cooking. So within this series, I wanted it to be more of like a living archive of 8 women and 2 spirit people living in diaspora. And so taking portraits of their hands with their chosen food item to make their recipe, paired with an ethnographic interview to really share the stories that are often erased due to gendered labor and colonization. And I'll expand on that soon. So I love to eat, I love to cook, I love to share food. There's so much that comes with that. But I really was curious about like cooking as labor. And so specifically within my Ecuadorian Puerto Rican household, cooking was a gendered labor, and just seeing like what recipes are nourishing our communities, our families, our loved ones, our movements, our spirits, and how I have found within movement spaces like that act of cooking, the act of feeding people is often minimized. It's often erased. It's like made not as important. Like it's just like it's not leadership, but if folks weren't being fed, like folks wouldn't be able to show up. And so I really want to, use this series as a way to question that and to see like, where does, these recipes, this act of cooking, this ritual, like, why is that being minimized? And tied with Diana, it's a lot of colonization. It's a lot due to colonization. I really am curious about recipes as a part of personal legacies and legacies of care, and like who do you take care of? Like how do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of your community? Through this act. Diasporic foodways as medicinal. Indigenous people around the globe have used food, plants as medicine since the beginning of time. And I think a lot about like when you're attracted to a certain recipe, when you're attracted to a certain, plant, like why is that? Or like when you're adding certain things like bay leaves, oregano to certain recipes, like it has medicinal purposes. And I think passed down through generations, a lot of that is really erased and is lost. And yeah, with this series, I really wanted to explore that. I'm excited to, I use food also to think a lot about memory. And so epigenetics, which is the study of how trauma is passed down through DNA across generations, or how it, like, you know, trauma affects your DNA and you then pass it on. And I think a lot about that with food, right? And so, like, if there was also trauma with very real effects of colonization, of white supremacy, as people of the diaspora, so there was also joy and pleasure and love and comfort with food that gets passed down, right? And so I think a lot about when I'm cooking myself, when I'm like creating, like when I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna add a little bit of this, and like, oh, I can like feel, I can just feel when something is done without like tasting it, or like just through sound and things like that. And that made me wonder, especially cooking with plantain, which I have, that's what my portrait is about, because I have a very special relationship with plantain. Yeah, like, why is that? Like, is that like it's in my body, and it's like, you know, yes, because, you know, I cooked with it and, you know, have harnessed the skill, but also like, I wonder, like, when we're cooking and doing that, like how much is our ancestral memory, you know, tied to that as well. I also see cooking as alchemy, transmuting energy to heal. I think that's really, really beautiful. And so, like, definitely to me, like, when you're cooking in the state that you're in, the energy that you put into that food, you can taste that. Like, you can taste a meal that is with love. And so I think that's beautiful, and how we can use that, you know, as people living in diaspora, to time travel and like use it in memories of like, when did you make this this meal? And so for me personally, making bolones, that's a part of that. So this is my piece, Across Oceans. It's a mixed media on reclaimed wood, so lino cut relief, portrait, and I painted the ocean. Yeah, so my personal story with that is plantain is the culinary bridge between my Ecuadorian mother and my Puerto Rican father. In my household, we eat a lot of plantains. We used to. I personally do. And yeah, it's such a nurturing, comforting food for me. And so within my household, making bolones was a gender task as the eldest daughter, right? Like, that was my role. And in order to make bolones, you, like, you know, peel the plantain and you fry it, and then you have to, like, you know, mash them, and then you form them into balls, and it's really hot, right? And so it's just kind of like one of those things where the efforts in labor, right? Like, in cooking as labor, that's, you know, often erased. It's like, that is hot, like, it's hot plantains that you're rolling in your hands. And I think that that only adds to like the expansiveness of cooking, of like how much effort really gets, you know, it gets put into that. Yeah, plantains have taught me a lot about patience. I mean, trying to peel a plantain, cooking it. Personally, that's my number one rule with cooking plantain is like, do not walk away because you will burn. They will burn. So yes, I'm gonna do some detail shots here So that's lino cut relief. I hand drew and carved that. The ocean behind the portrait is symbolism to the waters that connect me to my ancestry, my homelands of Ecuador and Boriquen. So yeah, I think a lot about like how water, what messages, what the complexity, as Diana was speaking to earlier as well, that water holds. And so for me within my family, like my tia Mireya lost her life in that ocean. I learned to swim in the Pacific Ocean. So there, it's like a complex, you know, ancestry traveling through across water. So really the complexity of that, and just thinking a lot about like the similarity of like of salt water, like, you know, has given fruit to all life, and also the salt water in my mother's womb that held me, right? And this is the same salt as in our tears. And so I just think a lot about yeah, how similar and how much of the ocean is within us as well. So a little more detail. And that's Nepalese handmade paper and metal leaf on there. And lastly, I'm just gonna share some of the books, the major inspirations, but also yeah, research that really guided this work and this series. The Cooking Gene, I think every single person should read it. It is incredible, especially if you're thinking about food. And this quote, ideas and emotions are ingredients, satire, irony, longing, can't see, resistance, and you have to eat the food to extract the meaning. The food of both diasporas depend on memory. One memory is the sweep of the people's journey, and the other is the little bits and pieces of individual lives shaped by ancient paths and patterns. The food is an archive, the keeper of secrets. One sec. Oh, yeah. So also in the Cooking Gene, that's where I really learned that fufu is the original version of mofongo, which then also is like related to bolones, which are both with mofongo within the Caribbean, within my Puerto Rican ancestry, and bolones of my Ecuadorian ancestry. And so in the Cooking Gene, he talks about, you know, how fufu is really the original dish through the economy of stolen, you know, enslaved African people, how they came to the Caribbean, how it came to South America, and how that culinary history is so often erased. And doing research around bolones as well within South America, within Latin America, it's just really like, they're like, oh, we don't know how it came here. We don't know how this dish came here. We know it's like, you know, with the cheese and the ham, we know that's, you know, post Spain colonization, but it's also kind of just like what is erased, like what else was on those ships, right? And that's due to the anti-Blackness within the Latinx, you know, community. And so I really want to question, I really want to like think about, right? Like our dishes, like what are the origins of that? And how has, I don't want to center on colonization, but I want to really just, you know, yeah, like learn what are the origins, especially if like they're being erased due to anti-Blackness. Another piece, love as the practice of freedom, which I think about, bell hooks and around love, I highly recommend. But the quote that really stuck out to me, I'm not going to read all of it, but the moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression, and just how cooking can be a form of that. And I think what I would like to see within movement spaces and within, how we take care of one another is, cooking as a part of that, like cooking as movement as well. And lastly, this book, If I Can Cook, God Can, by Entosaki Shangi, and highly recommend. And I'm gonna do an activity after this, but this quote really not just shaped this series, but really has like changed the way that I think about like the celebration within our process of like taking care of each other. But seriously, and here I ask for a moment of quiet meditation. What did Louverture, Petition, and Dessalines share for their victory dinner, realizing they were the first African nation slave-free in the New World? What did Bolivar crave as independence from Spain became evident? What was the last meal of the defiant Inca at the Hualpa before the Spaniards made a public spectacle of his defeat? What are free people chose to celebrate victory? What sated the appetites of enslaved people no longer enslaved Africans, not Haitians, ordinary men made mystical by wont of their taste of freedom? So like, how do you consecrate our newfound liberty? How do you celebrate? What will you eat? So the last part of my portion, I would really invite everyone to just take a deep breath wherever you are sitting or wherever you are, to really take a moment to notice any tension in your body and see, just to let it go. Unclench your jaw, let your shoulders fall down away from your ears. And if you're comfortable, closing your eyes or perhaps lowering your gaze. I'm going to ask for you to imagine a world where everyone's needs are met, where everyone is housed, clothed, fed, and protected. Where rivers, oceans are rejuvenated, protected, and clean. Where the land is returned to their original stewards. Reparations are paid. And the fall of all of the systemic barriers that are currently in place that oppress these realities. So I would like to know, what will you eat? How will you celebrate? And if you can put it in the chat, I'd love to read what you would eat. What are you going to eat? For me, I'm gonna eat mofongo. Okay, I'm gonna eat melons, which is a new thing. I didn't eat melons for a long time and now I do. Thank you change. And jugo de parcha, just passion fruit all day, every day. So yeah. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you all for being here, for listening, for sharing with me. And I'm excited to look at what you will eat, how we're going to celebrate, yeah, creating this world together. The best way to keep in contact with me is my email, but also my website and my Instagram, where I will be sharing more of the process of my series. So what's next with Flavored Legacies is there's the rest of the portraits in process. So of all of the women and Two-Spirit people. So if you have Instagram, following the process there. If not, join my newsletter on my website to stay updated about the final exhibition in 2022, which will be online, which I am super excited for. And also the opportunity to donate to support this work and to share these stories and to pay the people within this series directly as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nicole. And thank you for that exercise too of imagining a better future, because I think it's rare that we find time to do that in a regular fashion, and it's so important, and it's so lovely. So thank you for sharing that with us. I wanted to, before we launch into questions, just share some of these fantastic things that people intend to eat. I will also say about halfway through your talk from Alexandra, we get, oh my God, this talk just keeps getting better and better with every slide. From Anne Polito, we get, I'm going to eat my dad's scrambled eggs, my mama's kare kare, and young coconut water. Thank you for this little practice. And from Alexandra, and I am going to butcher all these words, we get, I would eat dairy coal à pois and legume, also known as Haitian rice and beans with vegetable stew.
Yum.
And then from Robin, we get, I don't have a question, but I'm eating pho in community with others.
Yum.
Which I love.
Mm-hmm.
I love food. Such good timing too to get people thinking about it. So as was the case with Diana, I will continue to sort of review for questions. And in the absence of them, we'll ask my questions. But please feel free to share, everyone, what you're thinking. So one thing that you said, Nicole, that really struck me was it's not leadership when referring to cooking. And I think that really bespeaks this sort of innate capitalist mindset and valuation of these practices as tasks that become like inherent in our daily lives. And so I would ask, what ways might we honor cooking and those we cook for and those that cook for us in our lives that removes us from that dynamic and that narrative?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, when I think about like with like cooking with each other, like I would really think about like, yeah, like what that would look like, the opportunity of like cooking together. I think like it's not just like one person cooking, but like everyone's delegated a task, and really like communal. But what I also think about too is like how the food got there. And I think about like access to food. I think about food deserts. I think about people working many jobs trying to pay rent, right? And so, yeah, like how can we nourish them, right? Like how can we really turn that around, since like without them we especially like farm workers, right, like without them we would not be able to eat our food. Yeah, and also like what agricultural practices we are getting food from, if we're like really extracting and exploiting the land in ways Like that really is just like, it's counterintuitive, you know?
Yeah, needing to pay homage to and be aware of, our acquisition of food in addition to our preparation of it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, a linked idea, you said cooking as labor adds to its expansiveness, which I loved. And you talked about this attentive patience that you needed to sort of develop to cook plantains. And I was wondering, how do you see these skills interacting with your artistic practice and your identity?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. So like painting, I painted figure portraiture for like most of my life. And painting is like lovely, but it's so boring. And so like when you're painting, it's really like layer after layer, layer after layer. And then you're like, nope, I don't like, add more, take it over here. Nope, da da da. And it's like such a lesson in like focus and patience, and like you really can't, I mean, you can walk away, right, with painting, but like in plantains, but those plantains will burn. And yeah, like with the painting, it's like you got to see how it looks. So it's definitely transferable skills with that, I would say. Yeah, and with my practice, I mean, I want food to be included in my practice. I want the sharing of food to be included in the celebration of this world we're creating, without violence, without oppression. Like, I really, to me, it has to be, right? It cannot, like, when I think about food and cooking, it's like food turns into your body, like you're nourishing your body, which then turns into like, as people of color, people of the diaspora, and it's like, that's literally like, it turns into embodiment, right? And so yeah, I don't see those, I don't want to see those as separate as cooking in my art practice.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. For us, as I would eat some young green almonds with salt and figs with a white coffee, hot water, and orange blossom water. Thank you for such lovely presentations. And then she includes a question for both you and Diana, which I'm going to hold for our joint questions in a few minutes. And then Lena says, thank you so much for that closing meditation. It's important for us to collectively envision an abundant world. People forget we live in a world filled with abundance. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
If I might ask you a selfish question from the perspective of some of the UCSF people potentially tuning in, as providers or providers to be, we often see the role of food in our patients' lives in end of life conversations. So conversations about comfort and about, eating as an act of strength or an act of healing. And I wonder in what ways we can better engage and appreciate food in the lives of our patients, or food, in the lives of our friends. Like if there are any sort of best practices or things that you might like to share, be very amenable to hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was younger, I used to do volunteering with like hospice care. And food was like such a big part of that. Yeah, I mean, I wonder, like, when thinking about food with like, people you're taking care of, like, do you ask specifically, like, or is it, what would you like what would bring you comfort, what would bring you pleasure, or is it just like, this is what it is, like, and also like with bodies, yeah, trying to heal, right? Like there's like post-surgery, there's like restriction, like, around spices and things like that. But yeah, I'm curious. So like a question for a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, in the audience familiar will also know that like, I think we do often a poor job of weighting those things and of inquiring as to those preferences and those values. So maybe a good start is just to enter with curiosity and with an appreciation for how it contributes to their healing journey. So yeah, I think you make a good point in probing there.
I think too, I just because also like both Diana and I are very interested and committed to the practice of decolonizing. And but just like with food, right, like just looking at menus, right, like is their food representative of like many cultures, or is it just like, you know, what spices are used, what ingredients, things like how are they sourced, things like that, you know. Yeah, which to me sometimes when I, you know, I'd be curious to know.
Yeah. And even asking those questions and engaging with those questions in our position is very valuable. So thank you for that. I want to raise a question from Robin, who says,
hey, Rob.
Who says, can you talk about food as acceptance and radical self-love, thinking about the way we punish, hate on, and oppress certain bodies as a product and process of white supremacy?
Oof. Yes. Yeah, there are, yeah, I think it is an act of radical self-love, right? I think about like the violence of the legacies of white supremacy, which includes like all of these, like literally denying food, and you know how, which that turned into excuse me, yeah, like what bodies are, you know, normalized, especially within like medicine, right? Yeah, and the eugenics in that. I think that like there's a very real history in that, and it's all tied back to white supremacy. And so I know for me personally, I like to think about like when folks talk about like disordered eating and things like that, like in the larger context, like this was it's like a, not a symptom, but like it was like a condition created, which is like stemmed back to like white supremacy, right? Like the violence then of that. It's so extensive, it's so thorough, it's so, and it's impacts in the body, right? Like literally that, like that's the point of it. And so yeah, I'd love to come to a place, I'd love to come to a world, right, where we really let that go around like diet culture, the violence that is diet culture, the violence that is like fat phobia, the violence that is yeah, like not that, yeah, there's so much there. I could just, we could go on, but yeah, that's what I think about that.
Thank you so much for sharing that and linking it back to your point about intergenerational trauma and epigenetics and how these things imprint in very physical ways and predispose us to very physical, you know, embodiments of that trauma, even generations. Hence, which is not to suggest there is not ongoing trauma as well to compound it. So
true, yeah,
truly. I would love to welcome Diana back and begin just with this question from Farah for both of you. And she says, for both Nicole and Diana, how does working with your hands, textiles, food, art make you feel rooted? So maybe we can start with Nicole and then bounce to Diana.
Yeah, I mean, it's like so based on texture. Like I really, my work, the series is on reclaimed wood. I really wanted to not create more waste, like just to like use, you know, what there is. And but with that, it's pretty rough. So like treating it, you know, sanding it, all that. But yeah, I like to think about to like literally and quite literally the portraits of like the hands within this series, and like who did you get your hands from? Like what hands took care of you? What who do you care for with these hands as well? Like yeah, it's I love that question. Yeah, that's what I think. What about you, Liana?
I just like the acts of just to be able to do repetition over and over and over again. And for me, whenever I get to be able to like dye or even doing some type of weaving, it's just really soothing to be able to just focus on that, you know, and not focus on anything besides this, like, you know, this like piece I'm weaving together. And so that's like something I really enjoy, just like being able to work with my hands and like, you know, also just to have like the freedom to do so. And so like, for me, that's always like grounding to just like come back to my artwork and be like, I don't have to worry about people telling me what I need to create. I don't have to worry about what it looks like and whether people like it or not, even though sometimes it's hard, but I just get to focus on something I get to create with my hands like every day. And I think that there's a lot of freedom in that, and it's fun for me. And it's also meditative.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing that. I have some other questions for the two of you. So how can cultural practices and identities transcend space, particularly in the context of being away from ancestral homelands?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go. You know, it's just like something that I feel like this is what makes me who I am, you know, when it comes to just to be able to like, you know, do something that like my ancestors did for hundreds and hundreds of years just like amazes me. And, you know, even if I'm like here and like, you know, the colonization, the trauma that exists on like, you know, my ancestors as well as myself, I'm able to just be able to connect with that. You know, that's something that can never be changed. You know, and like, I just think that I'm able to just, you know, I don't know, just be able to like check out and even be in that space or just, you know, change my environment just when I'm able to like, you know, work and create beautiful art.
I think what's coming up for me is just like the opportunity of diasporic identity to like really transcend all these borders, all these definitions. It really is like, for me personally, I know like with my Ecuadorian family, still in Ecuador, you know, in Ecuador, and then my Puerto Rican family, they've all, you know, come to the US. Then like being raised in between different places, it's just kind of like, oh, like in what colonization has put on me personally to be like, oh, like fragment me, but really just kind of turning it and being like, how beautiful is it that I have these like different perspectives, right? And for me, I really, when I think about like these cultural practices and identities, like sometimes when I think about like belonging, it's like, what do I want to belong to about that practice, about that identity? Like, I don't want to belong to the anti-Blackness of within, you know, Ecuadorian Caribbean culture, right? So it's kind of like how can we disrupt that within these practices, within these identities, things like that. Yeah, that's what I think.
Oh, and I just thought about something also. It's just like, you know, regardless of like these cultures having, you know, some differences, there's a lot of similarities. And so when I think about like food, there's a lot of similarities with food. You know, if I'm able to go to Haiti, I know that they're going to have certain foods that I enjoy, or it's to Senegal, like, you know, I think that's like the beauty of like seeing the common threads, or even just like, you know, learning more about like the culture of like, you know, native, specifically the Choctaw and Chickasaw. Like there's a lot of things that are very similar to like African people, you know, especially with just like, you know, ceramics. Like ceramics is very important and beading is very important. So all these things are kind of like, they're very like similar. And so for me, it's like recognizing those similarities. And like when you're able to do that, you're able to transcend like this idea about like how race look, what race is, and even just like how racial categories like were created by like white people to like, you know, disrupt and kind of separate different people. And so, you know, for me, I constantly think back on like what are some of the similarities, and also be mindful to a degree of like the differences that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So you both have spoken beautifully on the idea of transcending these different lineages. I'm curious if either of you would like to speak on how you honor those different ancestral lineages in your work.
Do you want me to
You can go first this time.
Yeah. I know for me, like being away from my homelands, being away from that, like how I connect to that is really through the earth, right? And I think a lot about like there are times where I'm like, oh, like I don't know, like it's just around like Latinidad and like what does that even mean, right? But I'm like, the clouds don't care. Like they love me, and they're the same clouds, right? Like these are the clouds that like the ocean is really like wants me whole. The ocean, the land wants me in my joy. The ocean and the clouds and the wind, right? They don't want me fragmented and feeling, right? Like it's like, no, when I am fully embodied and, you know, and really feel connected with my ancestry, it's like when I'm connected with the earth in some way. And so that's really what I wanted to bring forth in my practice, but like in my everyday life, but also in this series where it's like you can't disconnect it. Like we are really like here, you know, and with, you know, because of the earth and all that. So yeah.
And I think about like Nicole was talking about like feeling fragmented to a degree. And that's like something that sometimes I feel as well, especially like learning what, you know, what it means to be Afro-Indigenous when there is a history of enslavement. And so like reclaiming that has been very difficult due to the lack of like conversation and like acknowledgement of like Black Native people. And so for me, you know, with my work, I'm able to like read and process how I'm feeling, because it can be very emotional. And even just like the experience of being a Black person is very emotional, you know, because of like our society and like the anti-Blackness that exists. And so to move as such, and then also trying to learn more about like, you know, the Indigenous ancestry is very difficult. And so for me, something that I'm hoping to do in the future is being able to connect to more Black natives and Indigenous people, to be able to like share our stories and, you know, have something where we're creating together, you know? So it's like exchange of stories as well as like learning. I feel like I need to get better with my weaving. I'm not the greatest, but it's like that can be an opportunity to have conversation and like, you know, even get to know more about like where I come from as well. So for me, like I see, you know, more collaborations and working with people, and even just being able to like travel and go to certain places and like, you know, and mourn, you know. And I feel like there's not a lot of moments where like Black people can mourn in a healthy way, you know. And I feel like that's something is very needed. And so like I want to be able to like reconnect with the land and like go to these different places, visit the mounds, you know, and, you know, learn more about where I come from, and just like not allow myself to feel fragmented or to feel as if like, you know, my indigeneity doesn't matter, or my Blackness doesn't matter. I just feel like for me, I'm still trying to learn how to ground myself with my culture.
Mhm.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I think we have time for just one last question. So I'll ask, given sort of the title of the series and where we find ourselves here at the end of this discussion, what does water carry?
Water carries, for me, traditions, healing, and memories, and joy, and even like sorrow to a degree. And I spoke about this a little earlier, just how like, water is like seen as a pathway. And that's like something that I always like think about when I'm going to a body of water, like, you know, just thinking about all the people that travel, and even just like some of the atrocities that exist there, which can be sometimes a little dark, but I think sometimes that can be very real, and even just like knowing the history of like what has happened on the shores and things like that. So for me, it's like a mixed emotions experience of water, and even my experience of like, recognizing that water is supposed to feel safe, but also sometimes it feels not so safe, for a lot of like Black people as well.
Yeah, I think for me, water carries, a lot of memory. I think about like when I moved to Oakland from Florida, like I didn't get into the Pacific Ocean for years because it's so cold. And once I did, just like I remember I was like, oh, it's like such a joy. It was like such a joyful, immediate response. And later I was like reflecting on that, and I was like, oh wow, like this is the same waters like I learned to swim in. And it's really just kind of like, huh, like wow, and like the same waters that, my tia Mireya's in, the same waters that, um, yeah, other ancestors have, you know, crossed as well. And so it's really, the complexity of water. I also think about how water holds sound vibration, sound waves. And that's something I'm looking forward to in an upcoming series, is to use sound waves and visually, right, with other people resisting US imperialism and colonialism. Like how can we turn how can we use water as a method to like communicate, across our different spaces. So I think a lot about like when I'm drinking water, like if I say a prayer into it, like, oh, like that, then literally the sound vibration of the prayers like goes into you, right? And so just thinking about like there's just so like it's life-giving, right, as well. So mhm.
Thank you both so much. It's with some sadness, but immense gratitude that I say we now have to bring the event to a close. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Alexandra says, this has nourished my soul. Thank you all. But yeah, thank you everyone who came tonight to support this phenomenal work. Thank you again to our artists who you just saw were incredible, so I don't have to tell you. And thank you both for leaving us with all of these ideas to reckon with and to contemplate and to sit with, because I do think I speak for the audience as well when I say that your event will continue in our minds and hearts far beyond this interlude. So I wish you all a great night.
Thank you all. Take care.